activity. Why is activity important? Anyone? What's so important about CNV activity, choroidal nevascularization? If you don't understand any of the abbreviations I use, acronyms, please tell me, okay? I've titled this talk True and False Science of CNV Activity because a lot of our work now in assessment of to treat, not to treat, when to stop, when not to stop, is largely based on our assessment of disease activity. Okay? And that's really important because if we want to achieve good results, we need to know when to treat and when not to treat. Financial disclosures. And also because the earlier we detect disease, the better the outcomes. You accept that? Right? I have patients and doctors who tell me, my visual acuity is 20/20, 6/6. Why should I treat? Okay. My vision is fine, I'm asymptomatic. Why do I need to treat? So we'll deal with that. Better baseline VA is associated with better final acuity. So these are just the take-home points that I want you to remember. Okay? The earlier you detect and treat, the better. The better the vision at baseline, the better the outcome. Okay? And AMD is a lifelong disease. It doesn't stop at the point that you start treating. In fact, most times we can't stop treating. If we can stop treating, we can't stop following them up. And that's why all of us have this burgeoning load, right? I think our clinics are worse than the cataract clinics now. Agree? Cataract, after surgery, everything fine, discharged. Failing to detect and treat CNV activity results in progressive visual loss. So very important. If you delay or the patient fails to turn up on time, you don't have a lot of time to waste. Unlike other diseases, and we'll talk about DME later on, and other macular diseases, some are a little bit more forgiving, others cannot afford to wait. And if we are able to distinguish active versus inactive disease, we can then adopt a flexible treatment regimen. Okay? And we'll talk about that also. So let's talk about outcomes, and we'll go through some of the trials later on. I think all of you are quite familiar now with the AMD trials. We don't need to go through all of it. FRB is Fighting Retinal Blindness is a very nice project in Australia, which we are now trying to bring throughout Asia. And this is where treating doctors input patient data, and they can actually follow the results both at the start, baseline, and then also follow up. So you can see that when the vision is low, 49.7 is pretty bad. They also improve vision, but it does not reach the driving requirement. So they improve vision, but they don't really have a good outcome. Whereas patients who start with 61 letters end up much closer to being able to be independent. So even though they don't gain as much, here is 4 letters and this is 7 letters, right? It seems as if maybe the benefit is not as great. But ultimately, it is not about how much they gain, but what they end up with, which is more important. So don't wait until the vision drops to 50 letters, which is about 624, before you start treating, right? So that's one principle. This is another big study, Luminous. We followed 30,000 patients over 5 years. So this is actually the largest data set of real-world evidence in AMD. Of course, 30,000 have DME as well. When you start at 10 letters, you end up with 23. If you start at 65 letters, you end up at 66. So not a lot, but still above the threshold. And of course, when your vision is very good, you lose a little bit, maybe. But don't be afraid of that because you are maintaining them at normal vision. Okay? What parameters do you use for active disease? Anyone? Shout it out. Subretinal fluid, very good. Is subretinal fluid or other types of fluid?
Intra.
Intraretinal fluid. Yes. Subretinal fluid, intraretinal fluid. Another compartment?
PD.
Sub-RPE fluid. But that's controversial. Okay? Sub-RPE fluid. But the most important will be intraretinal fluid, followed by subretinal fluid, followed by sub-RPE fluid. So you need to be able to distinguish compartments of fluid. I will tell you that if we did not have availability of OCT and the technology that has grown with it, we would not be as successful in treating AMD and macular disease today. The two went together. So this rise in success in anti-VEGF was actually facilitated by OCT. If we don't have OCT, how are you going to assess fluid? Right? In the past, we had to put contact lens to appreciate, right, fluid. Sometimes not so easy to tell where's the fluid. PD maybe you can see, but intraretinal fluid, small cysts, you may not see. Subretinal fluid, sometimes very shallow, you may not see. Okay. OCT was really the key. And how many of you have ever used the time domain OCT? Probably very few of you. Some of you, very good. I used to start off with the time domain OCT when I was in fellowship. Right? So we had very, very raw students. I mean, time domain is almost like, I don't know, iPhone 2, iPhone 3, pixelated, very low resolution, right? But it helped us already. Hemorrhage, I think this is under-recognized, You know, in Europe, and certainly in the US, sometimes patients are giving injections and not examining. You just look at OCT. Can you tell hemorrhage from OCT? The answer is no. And another fact is, sometimes when the hemorrhage comes, the fluid gets less. Pai-san, do you agree? So you think that it's better because the fluid is gone or it's less, and yet actually the disease has moved into a more dangerous phase, which is hemorrhage. Okay? So hemorrhage, you have to look. And to document it, you need a fundus photo. All right, some people say, well, I've got infrared or red, green, and so on. No, it's not enough. I think the color photograph and your direct examination is probably as important. I have some patients who say, oh, the doctor saw me but never touched me. Wrong. I think you still need to sit the patient down. And to keep your clinical skills up, you examine them before you see the OCT. That's what I do with my residents and my fellows. I don't let them see the OCT. They do a slit lamp biomicroscopy, make a clinical assessment. Is there fluid, no fluid? Is there new hemorrhage, no hemorrhage? Then look at the OCT. Try that. Okay? We have a tendency to do it the other way around. Just like an orthopedic surgeon or neurologist, don't do clinical examination, just look at the MRI first. Not the ideal. FA, now we do less and less. But if you're not sure, you need to do an FA because the OCT does not tell you leakage. It tells you the consequence of leakage, right, which is fluid accumulation. I'll tell you another story. Young patients, good, healthy RPE pump, can have leakage on the FA, but no fluid on the OCT. True or false? True. Because the accumulation of fluid is dependent on the net inflow and outflow. If I've got a good pump, and my inflow is not that great, I end up with net zero fluid. And yet the patient is symptomatic because he's got active disease. You don't see fluid on OCT, you send him away. But when you suspect it, you do an OCT, an FFA, you see leakage. But not necessarily fluid accumulation. I understand it's rare, right? So I don't do a lot of FAs now. I'm sure Professor Pai-san also, his FA department technicians now very free. Now do more OCT. And maybe OCT angiogram. But it's still very important. Because you're actually looking and finding leakage. So you must do FA sometimes. And if you don't do FA, you don't know the enlargement of the size of the choroidal complex. That's also a sign of activity. And worsening VA is very difficult. I put it last because it's subjective and it's determined by a lot of factors. Cataract, quarrel with the husband in the morning, didn't sleep because was watching some Chinese serial the night before. So many reasons why visual acuity may not be improved. How many of you use ETDRS in your clinic? I'm glad, because I also don't use ETDRS. If we use ETDRS on every single patient, we would not be able to go home. So when the Americans tell you, right, that, oh, you must use ETDRS, I say, yeah, sure, we love to have ETDRS on every patient, but we can't. It will take too long. Right? So we use Snellen, right? Snellen is much less onerous, but not accurate. So visual acuity is not a very good hard sign, it's a soft sign. But when do I use it? I use it when I want to correlate. You see, when the stars align, okay, you see something on the OCT, but you're not sure, you do an FA, you find leakage, and then the vision is down. All these come together, you are very sure that something is going on. Sometimes if the vision is poor, but nothing else is present, can't find any sign of activity, you come back again, ask the patient to come back again. Right? 1 week, 2 weeks, check the vision again. Okay, so you use visual acuity, but in the context of all your other tools. Why do you want to use only one tool? Right now, we've got many ways to assess it. You can divide signs of activity into functional and structural. Let's start with structural because that's easier. Okay? I won't need to teach you how to read an OCT. Right now, all of you know the outer, especially the ultraviolet bands. What are the bands that you see, the most prominent bands that you see on the OCT? Outer retinal bands. Bottom, RPE brooks. After that, ISOS or ellipsoid. After that, the innermost one, ELM, right? External limiting membrane. There's actually another one called Verhoef's, which is not always visible. So these are the three most prominent bands. And then we always look at the integrity of the bands. But people are mistaken that the bands actually disappear when there is disease. Actually, this is an optical sign. Have you ever seen a marching band at a parade? Let's say you got soldiers who are lined up. And usually if the army is very good, we find the same height. So their belts are all around the same height in one row. That's the band. Now, maybe the troops have been waiting too long. One guy drops out, faints, disappears. There's a disruption of the band. But when he recovers or someone goes in to replace him, the band is restored. So there's no physical loss of structure. It is just alignment. When there is alignment, you see the band. So you can't over-interpret and say, oh, I've lost photoreceptor because ISOS is disrupted. Right? Because sometimes it is just optical misalignment. And that's why you see an interruption in the band. So sometimes I always correct people when they describe OCT. You can't say that there is actual loss of tissue until there are other signs. OCT changes between quantitative and qualitative. In the past, we used to go with the automated, right? So let the machine do it for you, measure for you, right? Let's say 50 microns, 100 micron change. But we are moving away from quantitative to qualitative. And I'll show you why. Fluorescein angiography, OCT angiography, we'll have a chance to talk about that. And the functional, besides visual acuity, actually you can ask them for contrast sensitivity, reading speed, and metamorphosis. Metamorphosis is very important in choroidal neovascularization other than AMD. AMD, not always. Let's say in a myope, myopic CNVs with recurrence or new activity, they will be the first to tell you something's going on. Right? They are very, very sharp and they're very alert to changes, even minute changes. You might not see anything when you examine them. Okay? So listen and talk to the patient. Of course, logMAR vision, they call it the gold standard of visual acuity, preferred tool, but the problem is time. Right? So most of us don't have a chance to do that. And why do we, in the trials, use logMAR? Because there is poor agreement between Snellen and logMAR. LogMAR gives better visual acuity in patients with poorer vision. So you are able to more fine-tune changes. You know, our Snellen goes from 660 to 6120, 6120 counting fingers, and then after that, you know, really there is no meaning anymore, right? Counting fingers can. But the LogMAR stretches the intervening steps from about 6/30 to about 6/90. So it gives you more fine gradation and at very precise intervals, right? Because it is angle subtended, this is optics. So if you are doing a trial, unfortunately you can't run away. In clinical practice, maybe not so important. What is important is you have consistency of testing. That means all your vision charts must be the same in the room, good illumination, the same contrast, and distance. I know some clinics, this one may be 2 point something, this one 3 meters, this one 3 point something meters, right? But you can't. You have to have consistency. Otherwise, you can't compare visit to visit whether the patient is doing better or worse. Look at this discrepancy between Snellen and LogMAR. Snellen is consistently worse than visual acuity across all ranges, especially in the low range. So this just tells you that your Snellen may not be always accurate. You cannot go with Snellen alone. But I think most of us, as you say, 99%, will use a Snellen chart. Okay? The other thing about vision is that there is a lag time. Lag time between drop in vision after activity and a lag time between improvement of vision after you have stopped activity. Right? Most patients will tell you, you know, my vision is still not better when the macula is just dry. You have to tell them that there is a lag. There is a lag. So this is very important because if you wait for patients to report a drop in vision, actually the OCT would have shown changes maybe 2 to 3 months beforehand. You know, you're late. This is actually a very nice study. I forgot to put in the reference. If you want, I'll give it to you. But can you see the visual acuity was maintained at this point, and visual acuity did not correlate immediately with OCT. OCT started to climb, fluid was appearing 1 to 2 months to 3 months. Then the visual acuity came down. So you cannot use vision as the only criteria. Right? I already mentioned fluorescein, so I don't think we need to go through. One other aspect for us, very relevant in Asia, is that not only choroidal neovascularization in our context, RAP is less important for us, PCV. Right? Polypoidal accounts for 40 to 50% of our AMD. We can talk a little bit about PCV. It's slightly different from CNV. We don't have a lecture on it, but I will be happy to discuss. So we need to define into which subtype it is. Okay? The 3 subtypes are CNV, choroidal neovascularization, about 50 to 55%. 40 to 45% PCV, polypoidal choroidal vasculopathy, and then the last 1 to 5% RAP, retinal angiomatous proliferation. The proportions are totally different. Proportions are totally different from the West. In the West, PCV accounts for less than 20%, usually 10 to 15%, and RAP up to 10 to 15%. So they have more RAP and much less PCV. OCT is about VEGF-induced hyperpermeability. You know that VEGF has 2 effects, angiogenic, vasopermeability, like histamine. Okay? So OCT only detects the effect of VEGF. It doesn't tell you any other thing. Quantitative or qualitative. I will spend quite a lot of time on qualitative. Okay? So I've listed it. Which are the ones that you think are the most important on the qualitative? Qualitative means you look at the OCT in different cuts. You cannot go on a map alone, number one, and you cannot go on one single raster. Of course, we always look at the fovea first, right? So the raster will cut across the fovea. How many of you spend time to scroll up and then scroll down across the entire cube of the raster. Only a few. More. I want to see everyone putting their hands up. At the end of this course, when you go back, I need to see everybody's hand come up when I ask the same question. You cannot make a judgment on one or two rasters. You have to scroll up and you scroll down. You go every cut qualitatively. Another way to do it is you look at the map, which has a false color, right? They have a topo map. And you compare the map before and the map after, and you look at the change. If you see a particular area of thickening, that's where you concentrate on the raster. So different people do different things, but whatever it is, you cannot go on quantitative alone. The quantitative is most accurate at the central subfield, 1 mm, right? It has 1 mm, 3 mm, 6 mm, standard. As you go out to the 3 mm, less accurate, 6 mm, even less accurate. So the most accurate comparison is the central subfield 1 mm. But disease is not only at the fovea. You have disease everywhere. So I think it's important to make it a habit. I tell my fellows, before the patient walks in, you have already started to scroll if you need to. If you don't have time, you check the patient, then scroll. You have to go up and down. Otherwise, you will miss pathology. Okay? Diffuse retinal edema, intraretinal cysts. Cysts are just sort of confluence of intraretinal fluid. So IRF, you will see in the literature, IRF, intraretinal fluid, is just small little pockets. IRC, larger pockets. So it's subjective. Subretinal fluid, easy. Sub-RPE fluid, easy. This entity called subretinal hyperreflective material. Sounds like mushroom. Actually looks a bit like mushrooms. Anyone have been using SHROOM, SHRM in assessment? I'll show you what it looks like and start to look at it again, right? For your future cases. OCT thickness doesn't always correlate with visual acuity. In general, it does. It's almost a straight line. But at the two extremes, there's a bimodal effect. Why do you think that as the thickness of the retina drops, the visual acuity actually drops as well? What scenario do you have this? Vision, of course, as the thickness increases, the visual acuity in letters increases and then comes down. Why is this effect like that? Bimodal on the two extremes. As you know, thick retina, usually poor vision, but abnormally thin retina is also no good, right? So don't be happy if the macular thickness goes from 240 to 180 microns, because this is the onset of perhaps development of geographic atrophy. Okay. So you can't use OCT thickness to correlate directly with visual acuity. I think most of us are using spectral domain, so I don't need to talk about time domain. Certainly SD is more effective than TD, especially if you're going to qualitatively look at OCT scans. So all our trials now are using SD. Look at the difference, okay? Night and day, so no need to tell you. You see, with the same patient, you can't really tell that there's sub-RPE fluid here. Right? And really, can you be sure any of these are intraretinal fluid? Probably, but you can be sure of the spectrum. Right? So make use of the technology. We have all this available. This is typical qualitative science. What is this? Intraretinal cyst. This is more like intraretinal fluid. But again, I told you it's subjective, the distinguishing feature. What is this? This dark space is subretinal fluid. How do you know it's subretinal fluid, not sub-RPE fluid?
It's between RPE and neurosection.
Very good. You follow the RPE line, right? And the RPE is still there at the base. So the RPE has not detached from the Brooks membrane. What is this? The CNV, choroidal neovascularization. Now, what's above the CNV? There is this irregularity or something called fuzzy border. I'll show you a higher magnification later. That's shroom. Okay, I'll show you some aspects of shroom. Shroom is thought to be protein, fibrin, lots of protein transudation and exudation surrounding the edge of the choroidal vessel. So SDOCT now can tell you with some certainty that it's leakage, but not always. Right? And that's why we still occasionally have to use FA. How many of you still use FA at baseline before you start treating? Good. That's a very good habit. Try to, because the moment you start treating, you alter the anatomy, you alter the appearance of the OCT. So sometimes you need to look back in terms of response at the baseline. If you have an opportunity to make it a habit to have baseline FA and ICG, I mean in our context, ICG. Okay. If you don't have ICG, it's fine. You start off with FA. It tells you the extent of the choroidal neovascularization. It allows you to type minimally classic, predominantly classic, no classic. Not so important if you're just using anti-VEGF. But if you're going to say, think about PDT, maybe. But it gives you a look to confirm diagnosis. Later you'll hear from Rob Paisan about masquerades of AMD. Subretinal hyperreflective material, or shroom, is now recognized as an increasingly important biomarker. So you can see that this is the PED, right? Sub-RPE fluid. This is a very nice illustration. What is this band here? That line which is intact. ELM or ISOS? That's ISOS. Where's the ELM? Can't find it. Let's look out here. 3 bands. Okay, this one is ELM. Can you see it's following it? So that's ELM, external limiting membrane. What's this band? ISOS. Then it stops. It's disrupted. Then it appears again. Can you see? But it's not clear here. It's fragmented. And then out here, it's restored. That is the ellipsoid zone. Okay. And then the RPE line, see the RPE is lifted? Sub-RPE fluid, right? This is Brooks membrane. So this is breaking through from under the RPE, this stuff here, this white hyper-reflective stuff called shroom. Maybe some of it is new vessel, right? I'm sure there will be some neovascular tissue in it, but it is reflective. So you can see it is as bright as the RPE line. Hyper-reflective, usually subretinal, so it's beneath the neuroretina, and it's thought to represent, as I said, fibrate proteinaceous. Why is it important? Because if you see it is associated with poorer outcome, and because it's proteinaceous, it induces fibrosis. So do you have to aggressively treat it? Absolutely. Sometimes no fluid, only shroom. Treat or don't treat? Treat. You want to get rid of shroom. That is the significance. Why do some patients not have a good outcome when actually the fluid dried out? It's because you're not treating activity. You think you have treated adequately activity. But shroom tells you that there's still neovascular tissue. You may not see fluid. You've dried out the permeability aspect, but you've not treated adequately yet. That's really more angiogenesis part. The permeability, maybe you have stopped it, right, in terms of fluid. So look out for shroom the next time. You don't always see it. It tends to be a more advanced disease. But when you see it, you have to act on it. Okay? Any questions about shroom? Yes?
You mind to show one more time where is exactly the shroom here?
So the shroom is above the RPE line, this stuff here. All that white dots. First, it must be hyper-reflective material. We think it's material, but maybe it's not. But it's hyper-reflective, it's in the subretinal space. It can be in the sub-RPE space too. But this is most damaging in the subretinal space because when Once you have fibrosis, it means it destroys the photoreceptors. Okay? Yes?
How will we differentiate between the shrimp and
Yep.
the whole CNP scar? Because it will also be there, but it will have a poor visual average.
So you compare with your color and clinical examination. So fibrosis or scarring, that's a good question. Fibrosis is what color?
Wine.
White, right?
Right.
Pale, white. Shroom doesn't appear white, it's grey. That's number one. Number two, when you are in doubt, you do an angiogram. Fibrosis, stain, but no leak. Shroom, leak. Another way I use is autofluorescence. Fundus autofluorescence, fibrosis, black hole. Right? When you have fibrosis, no RPE turnover of lipofast skin, so black hole. Shroom, you will still see autofluorescence and sometimes increased autofluorescence, but not dark. Okay? Clinical examination is still the most important. Gray versus white. Fibrosis is different from shroom. Right, but good question. Why is fluid different? Why is it important? Well, we know that you can have fluid in one or more components, right? Intraretinal, subretinal, and sub-RPE. The reason is because the outcome differs. So in this study, you've heard of the CATT study, C-A-T-T? Yes? Treatment trial? Okay, very important trial. So all of you need to know what is a CATT trial. Okay? Intraretinal fluid, this one, sorry, intraretinal is black, 61%. Subretinal fluid in red, 38%. Sub-RPE fluid, another third. But the majority had intraretinal fluid, or edema, actually, right? We used to call this retinal edema. So intraretinal, subretinal fluid, sub-RPE fluid, they are not equal. They're not equal. Why? When you have intraretinal fluid and you don't treat it, you will lose vision. So not all fluid is equal. Okay, MCQ question. Clue. Lucky you don't test. Intraretinal fluid cannot leave alone. Okay. Have to eliminate. Subretinal fluid, even if you can't eliminate, of course we try and eliminate all fluid, right? But you try, but you can't, you can still afford to leave a little bit of subretinal vision. Sub-RPE fluid, very variable. Even if you wanted to, most of the time, you can't predict whether the fluid will go away or not. Subretinal fluid persists in about 50% of retinals, no matter how you treat it. Okay? So sub-RPE fluid, don't lose sleep over it. And tell patients don't panic because it doesn't affect your vision immediately. It's not a rapid change. But if you have intraretinal fluid, you have to eliminate. Okay? With refractory fluid, persistent intraretinal fluid had more loss of vision than subretinal fluid. But the subretinal fluid people gradually lose vision too. I've heard some retina specialists say, oh, don't need to treat subretinal because subretinal fluid is tolerated and is protective against geographic atrophy. Have you all heard that before? Have you heard that before? Don't believe that. Because subretinal fluid is activity. Activity is disease. If you don't treat activity, you will end up losing vision as well. Maybe not as quickly. So subretinal fluid is important. Please don't go away with the idea that, oh, Adrian Cole told you to not treat subretinal fluid. Okay. Have to treat all fluid. But you have a little bit more margin of error and you have more time to treat rather than intraretinal fluid. Intraretinal fluid is more dangerous. Okay? Yes? So would I stop treatment if I can't get rid of all subretinal fluid? The answer is yes, but we monitor. Because you may not be able to eliminate all the subretinal fluid, fine. But if you stop treatment for 1, 2, 3 months and the subretinal fluid increases, you still have to treat. You tell the patient that I may not be able to give you a perfect result, right? In dry drying up all the compartments of fluid, but at least the treatment is controlling the disease. The worst thing to tell patients is that our treatment of AMD is curative. Is it curative? No. We are not treating underlying disease. We are not reversing AMD. We are trying to minimize damage and at best induce remission. And I think patients understand that. If you put it to them in that terms, we are not curing you, but we are inducing remission. So the cancer specialists have got it right, isn't it? Can you totally be sure that you have cured cancer? No. But you have induced remission such that the own mechanism in the body, whichever it is, right? In cancer or tumor surveillance, is able to control it, right? Prevent it from growing and spread. In the eye, it's the same. What we are doing is protecting your tissues from damage until such time that your own reparative mechanism takes over and controls the disease and angiogenesis. You think about it, when we stop treatment, or even let's say we're giving treatment 3 months, is it really the drug working over 3 months? The answer is no, because the drug disappears, right? 4 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on what agent you use, is gone. The remaining part of the time, when there is no activity, who is controlling it? The tissue. So actually, it's not all the drug. The drug is just keeping the tissues alive. You're preventing damage while you're allowing the body's repair mechanisms to work. There are some cases where, of course, they need the drug. They can't repair on their own, they can't control on their own, they need drug. 4 weekly, 6 weekly, these are the worst cases, right? So no choice. They are totally dependent on anti-VEGF. We see this in uveitis, we see this in other macular diseases. We are not curing the disease. Until that time, maybe we are normal. This is just another study that illustrates what I just told you. If you have intraretinal fluid plus PED, worst prognosis. That's the worst. Okay? If you have intraretinal fluid, IRC present, and no PED, they are in between. The best is when there is no intraretinal fluid, no PED, in terms of prognosis. Just subretinal fluid. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about OCT angiography, last 10 minutes. OCT angiography is now sort of taken the world by storm. How many of you have OCTA in your practice? Not bad. So more and more people. I have some people coming up to me and say, why do I need angiogram anymore? I've got OCTA. At the end of this talk, you will know that OCTA is only one tool, but it's not everything. Does flow, so OCTA tells you about flow, okay, firstly, not leakage. Does anyone know the principle of OCTA? What are we looking at? How is the OCTA image obtained?
Blood cell.
Hemoglobin. Movement of red blood cells in a particular vessel over a period of time. If it's very fast, you don't pick it up. If it's very slow, you don't pick it up. And of course, there are a whole host of other artifacts which are associated with OCTA. Now, so the big question is, can we use OCTA alone to indicate activity? And so we use sensitivity and specificity studies. Specificity, quite high, right? Because you see the network, you see flow, the pattern, yes, we are sure that it is a choroidal loop vessel. But it does not tell you when it's active. The vessel can be there, blood flowing through it, fine, but it may not be leaking. So sensitivity is poor. 67% to me is poor. I need to have sensitivity of 90% before I can trust this mode to replace FFA. You agree? Anyone disagree? A lot of people are over-reading OCT angiography because the whole world is talking about it, and then we have whole symposia and meeting conferences just on OCT. It's partly driven by industry, but don't run away with the idea that OCT tells you everything. Very subjective sometimes. I'm sure Dr. Paisal will agree. Active versus inactive, can you really tell the difference? Hard to say, isn't it? You can only tell on the OCT. How about here? Are you convinced? If let's say I didn't show you the OCT and I only show you the OCTA, can you tell? Not with certainty. This one, also not with certainty. Moral of the story, you use OCTA not alone. You have to use OCTA with OCT to improve your sensitivity. But do I need OCTA? Probably not. OCT, as we have mentioned, tells us active, inactive, active, inactive. I don't really need the OCTA, right? Principle, I think we know, but it's movement. Movement of, let's say you track one red blood cell as it comes through, and then the next scan that you take, it gives you another back reflectance of light. A good way to look at this, who has been to the Trevi Fountain? You throw a coin, so you will go back, right? So movement of water, but the statues don't move. So OCTA only detects the areas where there is movement, because the immobile parts cancel each other out. Simple principle, right? So what are the indicators of CNV? So a lot of people are now studying OCTA, right? Tiny branching vessels. So big vessels inactive, small branching network of vessels. The more dense they are, the more active. But what is more dense and less dense? Quite subjective. Therefore, it only is useful when you compare one with the other of the same patient, right? It's very hard to say patient A and B, you're comparing between patients. How do you know? You have to only compare between visits of a patient. Dense vessel network, arcades. These are just patterns. Medusa, C-fan, glomerulus. This looks like a fan. This is the Medusa, the ugly monster head. So the three strongest indicators are branching tiny vessels, dense vessel network, peripheral arcades. That means they join up at the ends. Let's see another picture. 5 criteria for quiescence. This is quite interesting. I sometimes use this. The straighter the vessels, inactive. When it branches into big trunks, inactive. Have you seen the bonsai tree? Right? You prune, then the main trunks are fat. Not the branches, not the leaves. So the branches of the bonsai tree, inactive. It's quite nice analogy. No arcades, that means it doesn't join at the ends. Looks like a dead tree. And this one here, perilesional halo. It's like a walling off effect. Dark. Actually, we saw this on FA too. If you study FFA, very often when the CNV is active, you see hyperfluorescence in the middle, there's staining, and then there's a halo or hypofluorescence, something like that. Perilesional halo. Gabriel Costas, who is now in his 90s actually, but he's really been so active in angiography. So can you imagine, at his age, he grew up with FA, he was one of the main describers of FFA fluorescence. And he's been open enough and nimble enough to evolve into studying OCT angiography. I mean, he's such an inspiration. Have any of you met him? Gabriel Costas? Look him up in the internet, okay? See what he looks like. He's really, now he's in a wheelchair, so he hardly goes on meeting, but he's still doing a lot of very good work. Now OCT angiography. So he published this paper in 2015 showing active versus inactive. Basically dead tree versus a live tree. So what are the key features of active CNV? Thin, dense network, tight vessels, peripheral arcades, right? Whereas on this side, the inactive ones, dead tree and a halo. All right? Now, will this help us at the moment with treating patients? Probably not. Paisan, do you use OCTA to make treatment decisions?
Yeah, sometimes.
In what context?
Like,
Sometimes when you want to see, I'm going to show you in my slide, in some cases of CSC, and you want to know if there's a CNV there or not. Yeah, I think that's the case.
Right. So there are special circumstances where OCTA has become very useful. But in AMD, I find it limited. I find it limited because most times you use other criteria. I have begun to use OCTA in treat and extend. Treat and extend means that we are trying to extend the interval of treatment, and we want to see whether it's safe to do so. For example, at 8 weeks, there's no fluid on OCT, but I see increased flow on the OCTA. I may not extend, and vice versa. Okay, so at the moment, nobody knows, right? We have no trials that show us that you have to use OCTA criteria to treat or not to treat. Now, what's up? This is exactly what Prof. Paisan, he read my mind. In CSC, you can sometimes think it's CSC, but actually small choroidal vessels lurk behind, right? In this study by Eric Souet in France, abnormal vessels were found in 12 out of 33 patients, and it was not detected by any other means except for OCTA. This is my old patient, 6/30, diagnosed with CSC, fluid, but there's flow. Flow signal. We should not see this on the CSC. So when we treat with aflibercept, in this case 6/9, the flow almost disappears, and it should stay this way. Right? So exactly illustrating Prof. Paisan's. The last bit is about false signs. Sometimes we think that the disease is active, so we treat wrongly. Intraretinal cysts are not always from leakage. It can be from degeneration. Okay? So degenerative cysts versus exudative cysts. How to tell the difference, I'll tell you. Outer retinal tubulation, ORT, very important. And the last one is vitelliform maculopathy. So I don't want to go into most of them because Prof. Paisan is going to talk about some of them, like vitelliform. Just to tell you that fluid can accumulate because of new vessel leakage, but they can also accumulate because of degeneration of tissue. When you lose neural elements, for example bipolar cells, that space is often filled with some kind of fluid, probably from the vitreous, but it is not leakage. Hallmark of macular telangiectasia is actually degenerative cyst. You do an angiogram, you see a bit of staining, maybe a slight ooze from around it, but actually there is no neovascularization. Tamoxifen is the other. Breakdown of the intraretinal elements, bipolar cells, Muller cells, and other axons. Macular telangiectasia is very important because it is a masquerade. Okay, again, I don't want to take over Prof. Paisan's talks. So think about that. OCT angiography will show you some abnormal patterns, but they are not choroidal neovascularization. You can see the net looks different. And very often you see tiny little telangiectatic vessels, dilatations. When you have atrophy and fibrosis and tissue below it is dead, you expect degeneration, and that often has cysts overlying it. So this is a typical example. If you are not sure, what can you do? You can do angiogram, right? We mentioned that. We can do an OCTA. Maybe an OCTA will show you a flow pattern. Then you know that probably the cysts are due to choroidal neovascularization. What is the best test? Treat once, not 10 times, right? You treat once and you watch. The cysts disappear, you know that it is exudative. is not degenerative. Sometimes, to trick you, there are degenerative cysts, but with some exudative cysts in between. Correct? So when you treat, some disappear, some don't. Then you know the ones who don't disappear are likely to be degenerative cysts. Then you don't have to chase. You stop the exudative process, but you leave the degenerative process alone, and then you watch. Over time, new cysts appear. That's exudative. Then you treat again. But you don't have to keep treating until all the intraretinal spaces disappear. Because some of you will say, oh, but Adrian Cole said you cannot leave intraretinal fluid alone, right? You have to treat until the patient dies or you die. No. What I'm saying is that not all intraretinal spaces are intraretinal. Okay? So when you're not sure, and sometimes I'm not sure, I will tell the patient I'm not sure whether this is actual active disease. We treat once. If it doesn't work, maybe we stop and then we watch. Right? If it increases, let's say within 1 month, it can't be degenerative. Degenerative cyst takes months to appear. It's not going to change from week to week or month to month. Outer retinal tubulation is very important. And this one you can tell for sure. Okay, first described by Baby Freund, is actually degenerate photoreceptors coming together in an ovoid pattern. It looks like a little tube. And the best way to see it like a tube is actually en face. So if you've got an OCT en face, you can bring it from the top down to the usually about the RPE subretinal layer. And that's where the interconnecting tubules will be. 25% of advanced disease will have outer retinal tubulation, very often unrecognized. Yesterday I had a patient with quite end-stage BIT's disease, right? So it's a royal dystrophy. And he had ORTs, outer retinal tubules, all over the place. Now what do they look like? They are different from the cysts. Can you see that there's a wall? And that wall is hyper-reflective, so it's a ring. The center is hypo-reflective. So the key here is the wall. If you don't see a wall, that's either fluid or degenerative cyst. If you see a wall, suspect outer retinal tubulation. Don't treat outer retinal tubulation. You would treat this, but you would not treat that. Okay? Let's see what it looks like en face. In en face, you see the interconnections. Quite beautiful. But en face is not always easy, right? Sometimes, let's say there's fibrosis, there's fluid, there's protein. You may not get it as en face. But if you do, you will be able to tell, right? So outer retinal tubulation, ORT, don't forget. Are you covering vitelliform, my son? Okay, so I won't cover this. Vitelliform is another false sign of activity, and you don't need to treat it. In fact, no use. So let's end, and then we can take some questions, do some discussion. It's important to define activity. Right? I will talk about individualizing regimen in my talk later on. So this actually leads into what type of treatment regimen we want to use. And for you to be able to do a flexible treatment regimen, you need to decide when the disease is active and when it is not. If you don't treat early enough, you have a poor outcome. If you don't treat active disease, whatever you have gained initially, all wasted. Totally wasted. Use qualitative rather than quantitative signs alone on the spectral domain OCT, and don't just rely on a single raster. Use the foveal scan as your reference point, but you have to scroll up and down, above and below the fovea. Okay? Cannot overemphasize that. Of the 3 fluid compartments, subretinal, sub-RPE, intraretinal, the most damaging to vision is what? Intraretinal, followed by sub-RPE, followed by subretinal. But it does not mean that subretinal fluid is not important. You still want to try and treat all if possible. And then we of course have this emerging technology, OCT angiography, which I think over the next few years we will learn more and more about. Okay, Thank you very much. Now, so let's have a few minutes for discussion. Questions, comments? Put up your hand, Enrique.
I'm curious about the shroom.
Yeah.
Is it tend to respond to treatment slower than the fluid? And when you evaluate if it doesn't disappear, do you like take it as a like an
Non-responsible.
Yeah.
Okay, good question. In general, you would expect that fluid will disappear faster than protein, right? So if you think about your days of management of, say, diabetic macular edema, you treat the thickening, but the exudates remain for a longer time. So short answer, yes, shroom will take longer, but it will reduce when you are successful. When you compare appearance of shroom, let's say over 3 injections, let's say you're giving monthly injections at a time, the shroom will disappear usually within 2-3 injections if you are fully responsive. Therefore, if you are not achieving a reduction of shroom, you can imply that maybe the treatment is suboptimal. But would you change drug and say this is not working just because shroom is there and not disappearing, but vision is good, there's no fluid? I don't think it's enough to trigger an alternative treatment. We would try to treat with the same agent, give it a bit more time. So instead of expecting it to disappear immediately, I would not switch. Now, what's the problem with switching? It's like doctor hopping. I'm sure you have a lot of patients who, after had 3 injections from you, 6 injections from him, 10 injections from the next one, came to you, you gave 1 injection. Then everything disappeared. PD disappeared, fluid disappeared, so you're the best doctor in the world. Is it true? Yes, I think it's true, right? Not always, right? It depends on what stage of disease you're caught in. So if you keep switching from one to the other, and we don't have that many to switch, we have only 3 agents in AMD. How do you know which one is working, which one is not working? Have you given it its maximum time, the most appropriate time? Have you given it enough? Probably not. So before I switch, I have to be very sure that the patient is not responding at all. We'll talk about that in the afternoon because that's a very important issue. When to switch. And I think we are switching too readily, too easily, too fast. Okay. But the answer is, based on shroom alone, I wouldn't say non-response. But if you look carefully, actually the shroom gets less. A simple trick to look at shroom is to use the black on white scans. Most of us use either color or the white on black. To see shroom, the best modality is black on white background, right? Because you can vary the scans, especially if you use like a Spectralis or an Optoview, you can change the background. Okay, so next time go back, have a look at how many of patients at baseline at shroom, and as you treat, see the shroom melt away. The shroom should disappear. Good. Yes.
I have 2 questions.
Yes.
The first one is that how normally you see the intraretinal fluid in type 1 CNVs,
Okay.
because we don't see it that often. And the second one is the patients with geographic atrophy. One image you showed where there was a photoreceptor loss, but there were tiny intraretinal fluid cysts. And supposedly his vision is around caudate finger 1 meters. Do you treat or do you not treat?
Okay, let's deal with the first one. What is type 1 membrane? Anyone? Okay, maybe you can explain. What is type 1 and what is type 2 and what is type 3?
So the type 1 is below the RP, the type 2 is when it penetrates the RP, the type 3 which comes from the above, from the retina.
In the retina, right? So type 1 is the most common subtype of neovascularization. It used to be called occult CNV. So it runs in a line between the basement membrane of the RPE and the Bruch's. Sub-RPE. Okay. And you're right that in the early disease, most of the fluid will be subretinal. Because that's the deep compartment, you don't see intraretinal. The moment you see intraretinal fluid in a type 1, it means that the disease has been long-standing. That's why the visual outcome is so poor. So when you see intraretinal fluid, regardless of the type, it means that there's quite severe, possibly long-standing disease. The reverse is probably true in RAP, or type 3 neovascularization. Don't forget the new vessels start on the retinal side of the RPE. So you think about it, RPE is that reference point, right? Type 1 is below the RPE, so external to it. Type 2 is on the surface, the classic type of membrane. Type 3 is even in the mid-retina, so from the retinal side. So if you have retinal side disease, where do you expect the fluid? Intraretinal, right? Like diabetic macular edema, you hardly see subretinal fluid. You don't see sub-RPE fluid, that's for sure. But you often see intraretinal fluid. So RAP is largely intraretinal. Okay? We'll deal with RAP a little later on because RAP is a very distinct entity which you also should identify. Because RAP gives you more atrophy. They are very sensitive to VEGF, but you have to treat a lot. And the other eye will almost always get the same thing. They tend to be older, so the outcomes are not so good, right? So go back to your first question. If you see intraretinal fluid in a type 1 occult membrane, it means that the disease already is quite severe, it's quite significant. Now, when do you stop treatment? When you think it is a degenerative cyst and vision is unlikely to improve, you should stop. But stop does not mean discharge. We are withholding treatment. So the proper term is withholding treatment. But with the option of reinstating treatment. Why? Because if we stop treatment, more cysts appear. That means the disease is still active. It's not just degenerative. Number 2, you ask the patient, does it make a difference when I treat and I don't treat? You'll be surprised, no? Patients can tell you. So I have patients counting fingers, they tell you, oh, my vision is bad, and true enough, there is intraretinal fluid. You treat them, they're still counting fingers, you know. But they say, I feel much better. Is that placebo? No. Why? There are elements of visual function we don't measure. Contrast sensitivity, reading speed, especially low light vision. We don't check that, right? If you were to use those parameters, then you will see the difference. So the question is, talk to your patient. If you are not sure, you can stop treatment anytime, and you monitor them closely, over 1 month, over 2 months, and you see whether fluid reaccumulates and whether the vision is worse from the patient's point of view. There is no hard and fast rule. I don't stop treatment for everybody just based on criteria. You talk to the patient and say, I'm thinking of stopping treatment. The patient will say, fine. But if you feel that the vision is worse after that, we are going to restart treatment. Answer your question? Last question. Okay? If not, okay. So we are going to have a short break. One last question, yes.
In case to differentiate the Schrom and the subretinal fibrosis to treat or not to treat, when you suggest for every patient to use the FA in every case, or just the clinical examination, the white or gray is enough? Because some place, especially in Thailand, in the other province, some cases, some hospitals don't have a FA.
I agree. I think we're not using FA enough, right? But I think the movement, the trend internationally is to try and be less invasive, you know. But I agree entirely. I think when you're not sure, the gold standard is still FA. Don't forget that you have to learn how to interpret FA. Some people interpret staining as leakage. So hyperfluorescence is not always leakage, right? You can have pooling, you can have staining, and you can have leakage. So you need to be able to distinguish the three by having sequential examination. Okay? But if you are good at reading FA, you have FA, you should use it. I agree with you. Right? Because if you're not sure, you are doing a patient a disservice when you're withholding treatment. You think about it, over-treatment is not going to cause blindness unless they get endophthalmitis. Under-treatment is likely to. Right. We're going to break now. Slight change in your program. We're going to have a quick tour of the hospital. We're very lucky that today is Saturday, and so the hospital is largely not so busy. So Professor Paisa will allow us to view and just tour the hospital. Then we have tea. after T,